What is up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Limited Resources. This is episode number 245. My name is Marshall. I'm one of your Limited Resources. Joining me on the line, as with every week, it's the Bwonger, Brian Wong.
Marshall, I have good news and bad news.
Give it to me.
The good news is I'm undefeated when I don't have Ornithopter in my deck. You can probably guess the bad news.
We'll talk about that in a minute. Before we do, let's talk just for a minute here about cardkingdom.com. Fantastic place to buy your Magic cards. They're also the sponsor of this podcast. You know that. I tell you that every single week. So why haven't you gone there yet? You have. Okay, good. Then keep going there. We're really happy about it. I keep getting more emails. I'm sure you do too, Brian, or tweets and stuff like that about how quickly they ship their product and how good their customer service is. Those are really two of the main reasons why we love Card Kingdom. They've got a full selection. Remember, CK is a big store. In fact, not only are they a big physical location, they're opening up another big physical location. So if you're coming to the Pacific Northwest and you're going to be staying in Seattle, you need to go to their flagship store in Ballard. And if you're going to be staying over on the east side, as we call it over here, you can go to Bellevue, and they're going to be having that store open sometime near the end of this year is when it's slated currently. And you know how those things go, building permits, blah, blah, blah. But they're working on it, and they're already going. I've seen some pictures of what it's going to look like on the inside. And I got to say, these guys just get it, and they do the same stuff on their website. They take care of you. They know this like magic people. They get it. They know what you want, and they get you in. They get you out. They charge you a reasonable price for great service, fast shipping, and a full selection of stuff. We do highly encourage you to check out cardkingdom.com.
I'm going to buy 2 boxes of Conspiracy with the store credit that I just got. Really excited to add that to my grab bag selection.
That's going to be insane.
Yeah, they're down to $85 now, so I'm going to pick up 2. I was going to pick up 1. I'm like, I can't pass up that price.
Yeah, this is the time then. I think those will start creeping back up as people go, I want to draft Conspiracy again. It's a pretty unique product, you know.
Just stash a box of that away. It'll be a fun thing to pull out of the vault in 2 years.
Yeah, it also I might even go up. There's definitely some cards in there that are worth a pretty penny, especially some of the foils. Mm-hmm. Okay, so this week we're going to talk about 2 things. One in a more minor way, but we wanted to give some updates. That's M15 and sort of how drafts have been going and things that for us. But the main topic of the show is actually going to be team limited. So there's a Grand Prix coming up in just a week and a half from the time of this recording, and these are things that happen 3 or 4 times during the course of a calendar year. They're team limited GPs, and we're going to be talking about how to prepare, what the difference is, all the different little things that come along with playing in a team event versus one where you're just playing for yourself. Mm-hmm. Now, before we do, though, we've got a crack-a-pack to do, and we've got a little ranting to do. Brian, Jace or a Johnny?
Oh, boy.
Who's going to get it?
I don't have a good sense for that yet.
They looking. No, this is a picture
pack?
on the booster pack.
Yeah. Oh, I thought you were making me pick.
No.
Oh, let's open Jace.
Now I kind of want to know that, though.
Let's open Jace. I mean, I haven't played with or against Jace or a Johnny yet, so I don't have a strong feel for that.
I think it's Jace, probably. All right, here comes Jace getting... Oh, man, I just tore his head in half. That's unfortunate. A pretty good one to kick things off here. It is Inferno Fist.
Yeah, that's my go-to.
This card's been good.
Yeah, I like casting that like on a Child of Night, getting in for 4 damage and then using it to kill their creature, that kind of stuff.
Just those sort of like tempo, use up your mana, kill something type plays.
Yeah, I have noticed that when it's really, in general, not a great idea to tap out for an Inferno Fist because you just really open yourself up to getting 2 for 1 there. And I would usually prefer not to do that, and I see my opponents doing that sometimes. And then you get to kill the creature and get a 2 for 1. Whereas if you keep the 1 mana open, you can always just like sack it
and throw it at their face or whatever.
Yeah,
like,
I mean,
worst case scenario.
Exactly.
Okay, so Inferno Fist, that one's been good. This one's been pretty good too. I think you nailed it, and I agreed with you. Sungrace Pegasus. It's annoying. Card is so, it's just like, go away. And it's pulls its weight.
Yeah, I think that card's fine, even without like a ton of augmentation in your deck. It just actually has the same type of life swing that like a Rune Claw Bear does, right?
Right.
So, I mean, just on that, it's already playable. But you have evasion, and because it has lifelink, it is like an extra good target for any kind of augmentation.
That's right. Research Assistant. That's the 1/3 for 1 and a blue that has loot for 3 and a blue and tap it, which is insanely expensive.
I mean, how's that been for you? It's just something that fills your mana curve, but has
Yes.
some upside, right?
Yes, that's exactly what it is. It's if I need a 2-drop, it's fine. It does block plenty of things on the ground, so it makes up for the fact that the loot is so pricey. And occasionally you activate it. I've activated it more times than I'd like to admit. Thundering Giant is the 4/3 haste for 5 mana. I haven't actually seen one of these on the battlefield yet, but it seems like an okay 5-drop.
I have a feeling that it's probably fine.
Yeah, that's kind of what I think too. I just haven't actually seen anybody play it.
Right, it's just not that enticing. And I've been playing black like with red, and you kind of like rather play the vampire that gets flying in your 5 spot, and obviously the Nightfire Giant. So it's like it's kind of like it's always for me competing in that 5 spot, and it just looks like the worst one of the group, but it seems okay.
What about the vampire that you can sack your guys?
Haven't played that yet. I have a theory that like maybe in white black or something like that where you have tokens, it could be okay.
Okay. Titanic Growth is next.
Yeah, just fine. I wouldn't play like a whole bunch of them, but I
Yeah.
think like 1 or 2 is totally fine.
Yeah, I found it decent in decks that have a lot of Runeclaw bears because they will put out something with 3 toughness or a 4/4, and it is nice to just have some way to break through that. It tends to be the board states that I see have like a bunch of small things and then one medium thing that will hold off a bunch of medium or smaller things. And I think Titanic Growth is a decent tool for that, but I'm not super stoked on it.
It does seem like M15 has quite a bit of like instant speed removal that they can kind of trump your Titanic Growth with.
Yeah, it's just expensive. You have to be careful. Naturalize.
Not main decking that so far.
I'm not either, but there's definitely people are playing enough artifacts, especially, but also some of the auras are pretty pesky. You see Encrust all the time.
I think it's a bit of a better sideboard card than it would normally be, even.
Yeah,
like
agreed.
And you never know if you're going to face that Ensoul artifact deck, and if you do, it's such a ridiculous blowout against them.
Yeah, and I mean it kills others. It kills Stab Wound. It kills like Caustic Tar. Like there's just random stuff that people do play that it does hit. So to me, it's right on the fringe. Black Cat.
I think Black Cat's overrated. Like I really just don't like it that much, and I would prefer to only play it like out of the board or something like that if they have a lot of 1 toughness things that are attacking me. It just they can kind of just ignore it for a while if they're not attacking on the ground, or just even if you just chump block something big with it, doesn't really feel like that good of an effect to me.
No.
I don't know. I'd rather just put something a little bit beefier for the cost in my deck.
Yeah. Hunt the Weak.
I mean, it's the same thing it's always been. It's playable, but
It's like marginally playable.
yeah, really. I think other people like this card more than I do.
Yeah, that's what I have too. I mean, the fact that it's a sorcery is pretty brutal, though. I have had a lot of creatures killed by it. I mean, it does eat stuff eventually. Unmake the Graves. What's your thoughts on this one? This is the 4 and a black. Return up to 2 target creature cards from your graveyard to your hand. It's an instant with Convoke.
I think I'm actually coming around on it a little bit, where before I said it was like you would only play it in a matchup where you thought the game was going to go long and your opponent had a lot of removal. I think you could main deck one of these, and if your opponent has a lot of evasion, you take it out, but because then your creatures aren't going to be trading too much. But I feel like in the majority of matchups, it's going to be okay at least.
Yeah, my experience has been like very close to yours, but just slightly still on the other side of I'd rather bring it in for a reason. The like having some graveyard manipulation or feeling like I was going to be in an attrition fight. Like then I'm actually quite happy to have this card, but it's just so clunky, and like getting the second target can be a big pain. I mean, not that you need the second target, but realistically you wouldn't run this card without it. And that's kind of, I feel like you usually get something medium and then something that's like, whatever, I'll take my crappy 1-drop back or whatever. I want to get, in order for me to be happy about it, I need a little more.
I don't know if it's because I've been playing red like almost every time, but by the time I get to turn 4, turn 5, the graveyards are just littered with bodies.
That does happen pretty quick. By the way, red is sweet.
It is. Red's the best color.
I think so, too.
I don't think it's really a discussion anymore. Like red's the best color.
Yeah. Runeclaw Bear.
I think it's maybe. I think it's better than it was in M14, but still not very good in this format.
Yeah, I've played quite a few Runeclaw Bears, and they're just okay. Like, they get outclassed pretty quickly. They get blocked pretty often. You do, like, that's what I was saying about the Titanic growth is, like, they need a little help.
Sure.
In Soul Artifact, Death Scissors are next.
Still haven't pinned this one down because I haven't been able to actually play it in an actual draft deck. I've been playing sealed. So I don't know. I don't know if you can actually draft the deck to support it well enough. Haven't figured that out yet.
I'm leaning every day. I'm leaning closer towards no.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I've been playing these drafts, the pre-release drafts, and doing videos, and just like I'm not playing it. Nobody's playing it.
Right.
I'm not saying it's impossible. It's just I don't think it's going to be like an everyday thing where you're like, oh, well, he's the red blue, artifact deck.
It's not going to be the situation where you're heading into the finals and you're going to be like, oh, I hope my opponent isn't playing the Ensoul deck.
Exactly. It's like it might pop up, but like my whole focus is away from Ensoul Artifact and it's onto the Mongrel. To me it's a Mongrel deck. It's not an Ensoul Artifact deck.
Yeah, the card's a beater.
It's a beater. Caustic Tar.
I've played it a little bit.
I've played it as well.
It's fine.
Right? I like it.
Yeah. How much do you like it?
I like it quite a bit. I've been taking it pretty early. I've found that like a couple of times I took it like third or something like that, but then didn't end up in black, so I didn't get to run it. But when I do, I've been building around it fully. Like it is just very difficult to interact with. And I've been in situations where my opponents played it on curve and I'm kind of dirtling a little, or maybe the board's a little stalled out. And I'm just like, wow, I'm dead. Like I can never beat that card. Like I have no offense going. I have to start just chucking resources at my opponent's life total. And once I start doing that, I fall behind on cards. I fall behind on board position. I fall behind on life total. Like I'm quite impressed with Caustic Tar. The question I have is, can I use it as the top end on a deck that's looking to get my opponent dead quickly? Mm-hmm. And so far I haven't. I've only used it in decks that are looking to sit back forever and just sort of shields up and then play a Caustic Tar and ride it to the victory.
I see. I think my initial inclination is I actually, at least in theory, prefer it in a more aggressive deck.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense. Like my gut tells me you can do that. I just haven't done it.
Yeah, it kind of feels like just about the best 6-drop you could have in that type of deck, I mean, obviously, like, the Souls would be better, but, like, or maybe Scuttling Doom Engine. But, like, outside of that, like, that thing is going to get the job done more consistently than just about anything else.
Yeah, exactly. I'm a big Caustic Tar fan. Circle of Flame.
I don't think that's really going to be a thing.
Is this a thing? Like, what if I got 3 of these? Can I just run all of them in the main and, like, hope to get multiples or something?
What if your opponent plays a flying creature?
Oh, doesn't hit flyers.
Doesn't hit flyers. I don't know.
No, you're right. It's not good enough.
It would be like the most bizarre situation for that card to be good, I think.
Yeah, I mean, if it doesn't deal with triplicate spirits, I'm out.
Right, and it's also just like they can just like leave those things back and block with them instead. So your card doesn't even like trade for anything really.
Yeah. Our rare is kind of cool one. It's Colonian Twin Grove.
Yeah, that seems sweet to me. Although I'm pretty unimpressed by green so far. Like I just don't really feel like I want to play a deck with tons and tons of forests. How about you?
Yeah, I feel like it's right in the middle of the pack. Like it's the Runeclaw Bears of this format. It's just like there it is doing its thing and just doesn't really reward you in a big way. Like a few cards have impressed me. The Netcaster Spider, I found that one really good. And there's a few others. Like I think that there's some highlights, but the other stuff's quite mediocre. The Seas of green, the ones that you just end up playing in every deck, like Runeclaw Bear again, it's just very meh. Like it's not exciting. It doesn't really feel like it has a lot going on. But there are some decent cards in there, and Colonial Twin Grove is definitely something that would make me want to play green.
I remember in M14, I had a deck that I drafted about 6 times. There was the mono green Howl of the Night Pack deck.
Yeah, I remember that.
And Howl of the Night Pack that makes 2/2 for each forest you control felt like a bigger reward than this Twin Grove is. I mean, obviously the Twin Grove is a pretty darn good reward too if you're near mono green, but the Howl was just like an automatic win every time you put like 7 2/2s into play.
Yeah.
This
This isn't as good as that.
Yeah, your opponent could still like race this, with a couple of chump blockers, or even like it wouldn't even be that unreasonable for them to like bounce the token and kill the main thing.
Right. This only cost 6, wasn't Howl 7?
Right, 7.
Yeah, so I guess you don't expect quite as much from this one, but yeah, I don't know. I mean, like for me, this pack comes down to, so we've got Colonian Twin Grove, Caustic Tar, still going. Sungrace Pegasus, Inferno Fist.
I think it comes down to the Inferno Fist versus the Twin Grove.
Probably.
Until I play more green, I don't really know. But
this feels like an Inferno Fist pick to me, though.
I love red.
Yeah, I mean, I know the Twin Grove's really good, and it would be tough to pass, but it is super committing, too. You can't splash that guy.
Well, yeah, that's the thing. You can't even be like, even if you're only half green, it's not that great. You actually want to be majority green.
Right.
Which is kind of a weird spot for our first pick.
Yeah, and Inferno Fist is kind of proven value.
Right. I think I would take the Inferno Fist.
I would too. At this point, I'm on Inferno Fist, but I wouldn't blame anybody. I mean, you take the Colonian Twin Grove, pack one, pick one, and you're like, well, look, I'll be green. Like I get to decide now, right? Now, sometimes the table won't let you, but you can kind of push in that direction if you want. So this is a good time to pick it up. I think you want it either really early or really late. And in order to get it really late, you have to already be in green. In other words, you're just a lucky human being. Here, you at least have some control over that.
I think the thing that bothers me about green is you just don't have that in M14 you had the Ravenous Baloth, or was the 4-mana 4/4?
Yeah, there was, yes.
Yeah, and it just felt like, oh, here's the part on the curve where I'm just like ahead of the other colors.
Yes.
And I don't actually feel that way in M15.
No, you're not. There isn't one.
It's kind of like the really cool green card is the Shaman of Spring, the one that draws you a card. And it's like, geez, that's really not that beefy. And like that's a nice card to put in like any type of deck, but it doesn't really feel like that's really going with Green's game plan of just getting bigger than your opponent's stuff.
Yeah, the Green's game plan in this set seems to be a little cuter than that. Like you're running the Invasive Species, which is a 3/3 for 3, which is pretty good, but you got to bounce something. And it's like, okay, well, that's a little awkward. And then you've got the Roaring Primadox, and that's similar where it's like, it's huge for its size. A 4/4 for 4 is great, but it also requires this weird upkeepy thing. And then you've got the 2/3 with Convoke that puts a counter on something, which is a 4-drop for a 2/3, and you need something else to put the counter on. So it gets a little awkward there, even though I think that card's pretty good. But none of these are just like, here, deal with this. 5/5 for 5 attack, right? Like there's nothing like that.
Yeah, and it feels like, there in artifacts there's like Juggernaut, and in red there's the Mongrel, and it's like, man, other colors are getting this thing that I want, and green feels lacking in that regard. It's like, it feels weird when the biggest creature in play on turn 4 is a not green creature.
Yeah, I hate that, but it does happen sometimes. Okay, let's talk about what do you want to talk about? I know what you want to talk about. Why don't you talk about it?
Sorry, I have a little rant on Ornithopter here.
Yeah, bring out the soapbox.
I don't really get what's going on with this card, why everybody seems to love it so much, but I've gotten this question like 2 dozen times so far, but it's like, would you play Ornithopter if X, Y, or Z? And the thing that really, really, really bothers me with the question is because that's not the mindset you should be coming at it from. Because the reason that Ornithopter is bad, and the reason that we don't like it, is not because like if you just had it for actual free, it would be good, but it's because it's taking up a spot in your deck that could be a different card. So the reason that I would ever want to play Ornithopter is because all of my other options were very bad already. So it's like, would you play Ornithopter? Well, it's like, I don't know. Like, I need to know how bad your other cards are. It's not so much that because Ornithopter is so virtuous, it's because my other cards are so bad. So, and even then, you need like the perfect storm of everything in your deck makes Ornithopter like barely playable, right?
Right, like the red and the blue stuff that we're, like the Mongrel we were talking about, or in Soul Artifact, or something along the lines for like a Convoke or whatever.
Yeah, but I've just seen like Illusory Angels, or like how many Convoke cards make you want to play Ornithopter or whatever. It's like, I don't know, I'd rather play Soulmender. Like, I'd rather play Selfless Cathar, like cards that aren't even that good. Like, I'd rather just play those in the deck if that's my reasoning, you know? But it's like, man, the threshold for like how bad of a card that I would prefer Ornithopter to that card is like, it's a pretty it's a pretty bad card that makes me want to play Ornithopter instead. And that's what I have to be considering. Is like I don't think there is like a draft I'm gonna do where I'm be like, man, I really hope I get an Ornithopter in pack 3, right? It's if I get to that point, it's like, oh man, my deck is pretty bad, and I have to play Ornithopter. That's unfortunate.
Yeah, that I think that's the dividing line, is that for some reason there's this mentality of like, I want to be clever, right? And I want to play cards that other people think are bad and show you that they're good.
Right.
And there's a Johnny thing that a lot of people have, and Brian and I seem to be pretty devoid of that. But that is a thing that happens in Magic, but I just like, that does not positively affect your bottom line as far as your wins go. So it's kind of like you have to prioritize, like, do I want to look cool, or clever or whatever, or do I want to win more?
The thing is, there are so many bad cards in the history of Magic. Why is this the one that everyone loves?
I think part of the reason why we get that feedback is because we've come down hard on Ornithopter.
I mean,
as a response.
LSV gets it. Anybody who says anything bad about Ornithopter gets like jumped on. It's like, oh, but what if this? What if that? Like
you don't have to tell me, dude. I wrote an entire article about it.
It's not just us. People love Ornithopter, and I wish I could figure out, like, distill that down to like a potion and sell it. I'd be a millionaire.
I mean, you know what it is? It's the underdog. Right? It's the little guy, right? I mean, Ornithopter is the ultimate underdog Magic card. It is, it does so little that everybody just wants to see it succeed. It's Rudy, it's the Rudy of Magic cards. And I'm sorry, but in the real world, sometimes the little guy doesn't win. And this case is one of them.
In like Onslaught block, there was an O2 flyer, and it cost like 1 blue mana, and nobody loved that card. And it's like, how often is the difference between like 1 mana and 0 mana relevant? It's like basically never. But nobody loved that card. Nobody loved that O2 flyer. So why do people love this one? I just don't get it. Like, what makes this card so cool?
I don't know. I mean, I like the card because, like, from a nostalgia standpoint, because when I used to play back in the day, I thought the card was really cool. So there's something about it. Like, I was one of those people back then that liked it too. It didn't have any bearing on competitive things because I wasn't playing competitively, but I liked the artwork and I thought the card was cool. Like, maybe there's some of that carries over, like the similar feeling that I have.
Like, it's funny. Like, it's a funny card, kind of.
Yeah. That's it. It was cute. It's cute and funny.
Like, you're playing a game with like big earth elementals and sea serpents, and then like, here's a kite. Like,
yeah, here's an unmanned kite that flickers by.
Just gets obliterated by everything. Doesn't do any damage. I don't know. It's just like, what percentage of the time that you draw Ornithopter is it going to be better than just like card X, Y, or Z? And the answer is like very low.
Very low. Very, very low. Yes.
I just don't see it. I mean, if I get why. I mean, I could get it. It'd be like, oh man, like my deck is so bad, I have to play Ornithopter. Like, well, but I guess I've identified that in this situation, it's correct. That could happen 2% of the time or whatever, right?
Yeah.
But that's not how people think. People are like, man, I really want Ornithopter to be the right play here. Yeah. Like, people really want it to happen.
So okay. I think the key is that what you're saying is you shouldn't be trying to talk yourself into playing Ornithopter. You should be trying to talk yourself out of it, as your starting point. And people are doing the opposite of that.
Yeah, it kind of feels a little bit to me like the way people want to play like 16 lands in their deck, where they're just like, like I just can't. I don't want to cut a spell. Like, I want to play all my spells. Spells are cool, and they come at it from the like, I'm gonna come up with any excuse I can to skimp on lands here. And like, that's just the wrong approach. I actually like look for reasons to play more land. And it's like,
right.
But that's because like I'm coming at it from perspective, like what's going to make me win, and not like some like emotional attachment, that people may be having. It's like, oh, I drafted when I drafted this card, I was thinking about it being in my deck and it feels bad to take it out. And I kind of feel like that's kind of like the Ornithopter. You have like an emotional attachment to the Ornithopter. You feel like you owe it something, but you don't. Like, it's a stupid little kite. Just Let it sit in your sideboard,
Let
please.
it fly away.
Yeah. Let it be free. If you really love Ornithopter, set it free.
That's right. All
Okay.
right, so let's talk a little bit about M15 before we get into the main topic. I just wanted to make sure that both you or I had a moment to sound off in case there was any revelations that we've had or anything big. I mean, for me, I don't have anything huge. I agree with what you said earlier. I think red is the best color individually. I'm still figuring out what the color pairs do. I played green-blue today, and I didn't like it very much. I played red-black today, and I liked it a lot.
Mm-hmm.
I played one other color pair. What was it? It was white-blue. With 2 triplicate spirits, and it was just okay. I didn't feel like my deck was overpowered, but it certainly had the ability to win, and it certainly had a game plan in mind. So I'm sort of waiting on that. I've played blue black a considerable amount, and I wish it was more powerful. I find it serviceable and fine, and I would play blue black and be okay with it. But you know how sometimes you feel like you're onto something. You're like, oh, like I figured this out before other people. It doesn't feel like that. It's just like, well, there's good cards here and I'm going to play them, and they work decently enough together to get wins. But a lot of it's, strength of deck and skill of play, as opposed to just like, I have an advantage over you because you don't know how these cards, this
Right.
particular color pair is good.
Right. Yeah, I don't feel like. I mean, I think the triplicate spirits and maybe the scrapyard mongrel are like the 2 things that make synergy, potentially pretty good. Other than that, you're kind of just taking a good collection of cards with solid mana curve and answers.
I do have one exception.
Okay.
It's the Convoke deck.
Yeah. I mean, I think triplicate spirits and
But
maybe
Siege Worm has really
Siege Worm.
impressed me. Yeah,
Sure.
like I found the that Convoke deck to be quite strong, powering out big stuff early. It's sort of a time-honored tradition to do that, but I think this format is particularly not well suited for it as well. Like sometimes your opponent has a card like Flesh to Dust. And when you put out, like a turn 3 or a turn 4 or whatever, Siege Worm or the Willforged Golem or whatever, you put out something big and scary really early. Sometimes it can be too late. And there's a lot of ways to protect your creatures too, especially in that deck. There's the Convoke, make your guy indestructible, and Ranger's Guile as well. So like I found that pumping out those creatures is nice. And the other thing I really like about it is that it challenges your opponent's deck to answer you on 2 different axes sometimes.
Yes.
Like sometimes you go wide and you do like triplicate spirits plus like raise the alarm, and then maybe you have a Sunblade Elf or something like that, or that, man, that thing has been a friggin' beating. I'm calling it the Overrun, but I don't mean Overwhelm. I mean the white one.
Oh, the charge. Or
Yeah,
whatever it is.
the Sanctimonious Charge or whatever it's called, the 4 and a white +2/+1 to your creatures, and then if they're white, they get first strike as well. That card's been a beating. And then also it can put out, a Siege Worm or whatever and be like, here,
Right.
deal with a 5/5. And it's pretty tough for decks to deal with both of those.
Yeah. The Venn diagram of cards that are good against Siege Worm and cards that are good against triplicate spirits is like unpopulated.
It is not there. There's a gap.
Right? It's like typhoid rats. Oh,
No, yeah.
Flesh to Dust. Oh, that's a huge deal.
And I've been playing like Selfless Cathar in that deck routinely as well. I've drafted that deck twice now, and Selfless Cathar has been great. Like, very, very good.
Like that's the cheap creature that I want to power out my Convoke stuff, not Ornithopter.
Agreed. Exactly. Like that's a perfect example, because the time when you do triplicate spirits and you get to still have your Selfless Cathar sitting there, it is fantastic. Like it just changes the way that your opponent has to play the game.
Yeah, and people have said like, okay, well, if you use Ornithopter instead, like you can get triplicate spirits on turn 3. Like I'd rather just wait a turn and like have like a cooler effect coming down the pike, from the Cathar or whatever other creature I'm putting in my deck.
Oh, totally.
Yeah.
Yeah, sometimes it's not all about speed, and that deck is approaching it being all about speed, but you still need a backup plan. I mean, because yes, that is cool when you have the triplicate spirits, but the cool part about the Cathar is that it trades for 2 ones on the ground. I mean, and it also sometimes just wins a combat step.
Yeah,
Half the time you just attack with your 4/4, and your opponent's like, crap, I was going to double block with my 2 bears or whatever, but now or my 2/2 and my 2/3. Right. And they're just like, ugh, right? Like, I don't want to trade this for your stupid Cathar. And maybe they have a burn spell and they don't want to trade that for the Cathar. And he just sits there waving at them like, I'm going to do something this game, where like you take a card like Ornithopter or something that has less impact on the game and it just doesn't do anything.
Right. And like I always think of like off what does it do off the top? And the Cathar for a 1-drop actually does a reasonable amount.
It
Uh,
does.
it's also kind of cool that it can save your spirits from that black spell that gives all non-black -1/-1,
Absolutely.
which is like that's one of the prime time like sideboard cards that people would bring in against you. And just having like this proactive answer to it is pretty cool.
Yeah, and there's no edicts in the format, but he would be good against that too. I just want to note on behalf of Selfless Cathar.
Somebody pointed out that you can basically tap out for a triplicate spirits and still cast Devouring Light when your opponent attacks you.
Yes, I
Like,
did that today. I did
yeah,
exactly that. It was so sweet.
and I kind of feel like for that reason, Devouring Light actually like goes up a peg in my evaluation because when you actually go for that triplicate spirits turn, sometimes you have to tap down some blockers and you might just take a big hit. And if you're trying to race, that could hurt, but now you don't have to take that risk.
It felt dirty.
Yeah,
Like when I did it, I was like, whoa. Like, because, it's one of those things that clicks when I'm like, oh man, like I have my triplicate spirits on the stack. I'm like, I can actually cast this Devouring Light. And my opponent, like my plan was to just take a hit from whatever it was that he had. And now I'm just like, kill that thing. Yeah. Yeah. Devouring Light has gone up a lot for me. I think it's quite good.
Yeah, it's super cool that you can make that play. I don't know.
Okay. Do you have any other stuff from M15 that you wanted to hit? I just want to make sure I mentioned the Convoke deck.
I don't know. Nightfire Giant, whatever he's called, is ridiculous.
Okay.
Card Chieftain is ridiculous. I really like taking one of those cards and splashing the off color with an Evolving Wilds and just like one basic land.
Yes, I actually wrote about that for the column this week as well.
Yeah, that play seems super effective and makes those cards way better first picks than your average gold card.
Totally.
Yeah, really been liking that. Blast Fire Bolt, I think, is a pretty reasonable 1 of or even a 2 of in a lot of
I
decks.
just keep wishing it had Convoke. I'm just like,
Sure.
come on, give me an out here. The thing's 6 mana.
Right.
But yeah, I've been playing it too. And I've noticed, at least in the early stages online, that quite a few people have been playing equipment. And even though there's really not that much good equipment floating around, people are still playing it. They don't care.
I've also felt that it feels jarring how much better Red Burn is in M15 than it was in Theros Block.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Stoke the Flames plus Lightning Strike is like, yuck.
Yeah, those are great, but like just like Cone of Flame, like you get like full value on Cone of Flame like all the time.
I know. I wrote about that for the column this week too, because I was like, it's shocking how easy it is to get a 2-for-1, and you get 3-for-1s like a decent chunk of the time. Like I'd say like a third of the time I get a 3-for-1, which is just like, I would not expect that, like that a 3-for-1, like there's not a lot of things I'd rather do with my time than get a 3-for-1.
Yeah, that card's super nasty. Even just like Forge Devil, I've enjoyed. It just feels like any amount of direct damage is like totally worthwhile.
Exactly.
The creatures just don't get too big for it. I don't know. Okay, so that's my parting thought on M15 so far.
Okay. All right. So why don't we move on to our main topic now? Not this weekend, by the way. I should take 1 minute to mention this. This weekend is the Pro Tour. It's Pro Tour Magic 2015 coming from Portland, Oregon. I'm going to be down there doing coverage with all the rest of the WotC guys, and it's going to be a sick tournament because of 2 things. One, we get to watch draft. It's M15 draft, so that's awesome. We're used to that at the PT though. There's always draft. I'm going to be covering the first draft on Friday morning, West Coast time with Zach Hill, and of course all the rounds as well for that. So I'm really excited for that. Also, though, this is the last Pro Tour of the season. So for those of you that follow the tournament Magic scene, all of the players are fighting it out to try to get to their status for the next year. We'll be talking a lot about that. We're also going to determine who the player of the year is. We have a 1-point race right now between Jeremy Desani and Reed Duke.
Who are you rooting for, Marshall?
Reed Duke, USA.
Obviously.
Yes.
Who would ever root against Reed Duke?
No kidding. Yeah, Reed's a nice guy too, even in real life. Anyway, so yeah, I would love if you would join us and watch the coverage Friday, Saturday, Sunday coming up. But to lead us into our main topic, the following weekend is Grand Prix Portland. They'll often put a Grand Prix the weekend either before or after a Pro Tour so that people that travel can just hang around in the city and then play the tournament on the following weekend. And it's team limited. And these come up a few times a year. There's usually like 2 of them in North America and 1 or 2 over in Europe or something, or, outside of North America. And it looks like it's going to be sweet. It's M15. And what we're going to talk about for the main topic is team. So Brian's going to be playing. Brian, why don't you introduce who you're going to be playing with at this tournament, and then you can start talking about how you want to approach talking about Team Limited.
So back in the day, Team Limited actually used to be a pro tour. I played in 3 of them. It was like my favorite format by far. It's great.
Was it 3-person team?
Yeah, 3-person team. Team sealed day 1, and then day 2 was Team Rochester draft, which has gone away. And now it's just Team Booster draft, which I think is more popular.
Man, Team Rochester, I've heard a lot of things about it. I've never done it myself, but it honestly sounds pretty intimidating.
Team Rochester was the format that it was the most skill-intensive format ever. Basically, there was never upsets. The better team just like straight up always won.
Okay. Which some people prefer, but most don't.
I mean, it's great if you're the best. It's great if you're like Kai Buddha's team, but it's really not great if you're any other team.
Right.
For Portland, I'm teaming with my friends Ricky Boys and David Derrickson. They were like old school in the Magic community, like probably if this was like during Time Spiral block, like we were all really good then. Like we'd be like a fucking sicko team in like 7 years ago or something. But I'm excited like to reconnect with some old friends there. So Team Sealed, like I'm pretty experienced in it. I haven't played it for a little while, but I can't imagine that the core principles have really changed that much. So hopefully I'll give you some tips that will make it seem a little bit less daunting.
Did you make it down to San Jose, which was a year and a half ago or so?
No.
You didn't go?
I don't get on a plane to go to Grand Prix, Marshall. It's bad EV.
No, I know, but this is like Life EV Plus. Like it was super fun. That was the one that I was with Laux and Zame. Yeah, we had a good time. Anyway, go ahead.
So Team Sealed, you get 8 boosters, right?
Yes.
And
no, for the team you get 12.
Wait, is it 12?
Yes.
It's been a while.
Yes, you get 12.
Okay, 12 boosters. Divide up for 3 decks. So your decks like end up pretty darn good because you just end up you can basically, if you have like your mindset on like 3 like main archetypes going into the format, you can usually build those 3. You don't usually have to deviate from them. But it's like you can actually flesh out like very like synergistic archetypes, and because it's sealed deck, you open a lot of rares, and you can actually tend to play all of your rares.
It's insane, by the way.
Yeah.
Like if you've never opened a 12 booster sealed, it is in like the decks are off the charts, and they're like really good draft decks by the time you get everything sussed out. Like dreamy draft decks where you're just like, oh my God, I got 4 blanks, right? Like if there's a synergistic archetype, you're going to get all of the whatevers that you want.
Yeah. So you kind of think like how good sealed decks can be with just like 6 boosters. If you can just build like a deck with 12 packs, that's kind of bananas. So I have a couple tips. One is that you should build all 3 decks before you decide who's playing what. And I really believe that that's correct, because otherwise you kind of get like this attachment to your deck, and you might be like, oh, but that card is so good in my deck. And your teammate's like, yeah, but it's so good in my deck too. And you kind of like, you can't really look at it clearly.
You're not objective at that point.
Exactly. And you want to be able to look at both decks, like, with no attachment to them, and be like, okay, I can see it's better in this deck for this reason, right?
Right.
Hold on,
is your goal at that point to make them evenly powered?
Yeah, so I wouldn't necessarily say it's to build 3 evenly powered decks, but it's to get the best combined strength of all 3, right? So if you can get like 2 10s and like a 6, right? That's better than like 3 7s.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Totally. Yeah.
But like in general, like I would say like building 2 10s and like a 3 is like usually a bad idea. Like you're in that case, you'd be better off with like 3 7s or whatever. Right. I mean, I don't know if the math adds up, but
the math doesn't. But what you're saying is that you don't want to go too low.
Yeah, exactly.
because that's a match, right? Like if the other two have to always win, even two tens aren't going to win every time.
Right. So kind of like, I would definitely recommend doing one practice pool with your teammates beforehand and time it. You have like 50 minutes or an hour, just so you can actually get used to the process before you actually sit down at the Grand Prix. I think there's going to be a Grand Prix in Nashville too, later this year.
Yeah, I think that's right. That sounds right.
Right. Okay. So, um, there's like diminishing returns to putting a lot of the same type of effect in one deck. For example, so like if let's say you have like whatever, you have two of the red souls and you also have like a blue soul. Like I would argue against pairing up blue and red for that reason. It's like, man, how many like 6-drop bombs do you really need in one deck? So like even if blue red makes sense, I would really look at other builds and see if you can split up blue and red so you can give a different deck, one of those expensive bombs. There's also like diminishing returns on like removal, right? It's like, I don't want to play like a deck with like 14 removal spells and like 8 creatures or whatever. Like that doesn't really work. You kind of want to kind of share the wealth. And the other thing is mana curve. You don't usually have to suffer having a bad mana curve in any of the decks because there's usually a way you can divide up the colors. And I think this is like one of my primary considerations when I'm deciding how to divide the colors. But just making sure that each deck has a pretty nice mana curve because, man, if you get that deck that's stuck with like only a couple of 3s and then like lots of 4s and like not many 2s, or you just get that one deck, it's like you're giving them a huge disadvantage because the decks that you're going to be playing against are powerful and streamlined, and like you don't want to set your teammate up just to get blown out of the water.
And in your mind, there's no excuse for that.
Right. I mean, sometimes you just get terrible 12-pack pools. Like, it's happened before. Like I've had some really bad pools, but in general, like if you have something you can do about it, do something about it. And I would say like building good mana curves in all 3 decks is really important.
Yeah, I think that like even the thing is the bad pools are usually bad because of rares, but
Sure.
the interesting thing will be like whether the format is synergistic or not matters a lot, right? Like if it's just a power level thing, which I think M15 is sort of turning out to be, it's like I don't think in the sealed format you're going to see like super streamlined decks because even in draft I haven't seen really that many, and your pool can be kind of worse than others, but there's so many cards that you're going to have a real deck, right? Like there's just no reason why you shouldn't have a reasonable curve. Like if you walk away from the deck build portion and one person's deck is just horribly, mana inefficient, you've probably made a mistake somewhere.
Right. I mean, I've had a pool where all 3 decks would have been improved by a 2-mana 2/1. And I was like, that's not good.
Just like random Bronze Sable.
Yeah, that was really unfortunate. But yeah, I mean, in general, like usually sealed pools are bad. Like six-pack sealed pools are bad because your cards are just evenly distributed among all 5 colors, and you can't really build a 2-color deck. But in team sealed, that won't be an issue, right? Because you can divide it up among all 3 decks, and hopefully you're okay. One thing I want to note is sometimes you actually don't play all 5 colors. Like sometimes like one color is so bad you actually just don't even bother with it.
Now is that a good thing or a bad thing in team? Because in individual sealed, whenever I see one of my piles is only 5 or 6 cards, I'm really happy because it means all the others are offloaded. Is that true of team?
I think it just comes down to maybe not that you just have so few cards, but you just don't have anything worth playing. And because the standard for like how good a deck needs to be to compete in this format is a little bit higher, just filling up half your deck with just bad cards isn't really going to cut it. So I'm not saying you should like go into it looking to play only 4 of the colors, but like be open to that possibility where some of the colors are so bad. Sometimes you split a color where you actually have like, okay, white is super deep and black is super deep. Then we're just going to split red down the middle and fill out those, and then build like a green blue deck or something like that.
I've seen that happen too. I think that's the hard part for people to imagine when you think of doing sealed. You just think of like not really having options along those lines because you only get so many cards. But when it's 12 packs, it's like a totally different world.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just like, do you want one of the pacifisms? I don't really have room for it. It's like,
Yes.
what? It's
Yeah.
like, it's a much different thing.
Yeah. I've definitely seen a lot of pools where, yeah, you would just have, you got like four or five like lighting strikes or whatever. You can kind of get to the point where it's like, man, do you want to splash a couple of these? Like they're good in my deck, but it's like they might be a more significant improvement to you. I could totally see that.
Yes.
I think the evolving wilds are going to be like at a premium, trying to figure out how to maximize your evolving wilds in M15.
Oh man, that those are always the fixing, especially the ones that don't take a true slot in the deck, like Evolving Wilds, are definitely at a premium because you often like, especially if you decide that 4 of your colors are way way better than the 5th, there still might be a card that you want to splash out of the 5th.
Right. The other thing is how to divide up your artifacts. Usually, what my tiebreaker is not so much which deck is it better in. It's who gets to cut the worst card from their deck to play this instead.
So you're actually looking at people's 23rd cards when you're deciding the artifact, not necessarily where should it go, just outwardly.
Right, because it might be like, oh, like Gargoyle Sentinel is a little bit better in this deck, in the red deck, because they have like a couple of Scrapyard Mongrels, right? But then you go, oh, well, the white deck would have to play Soul Mender or
right.
Something like not very exciting, and they're like, well, this would represent a big upgrade for me. So I think it's in that case it's better for the white deck, if that makes sense.
Yes.
Usually the artifacts and the cards like Evolving Wilds, those are kind of like the last cards you start adding to the decks. Once you've kind of laid out the shells. And the other thing is, so like you're gonna have like a first inclination. You're like, okay, I see some synergy here. Like we got some Triplicate Spirits. Let's get a Convoke deck going, and then red just has 20 playable pretty good cards. This will be a red deck here, and then we'll kind of like fool around. And sometimes the third deck you're like, we just can't come up with anything, and then you got to start over. And like maybe you split up white and green, and you don't build the Convoke deck. Maybe you just have 2 decks that can kind of use some Convoke. But it's like, you usually don't want to have one just complete lame duck deck if you can help it. I think just like, because it's always going to be best 2 out of 3. You have to win 2 out of 3 matches, and just being like, well, the 2 good decks have to win every time is really asking a lot.
That's just not reasonable. Yeah.
Because I mean, your opponents are gonna have pretty good decks too, and you just get bad luck or whatever it is, one misplay or something, and all of a sudden that costs you the entire round. And yeah, you can't really afford that. So then I think once you build your 3 decks, I think that's when you should decide who plays them. That's just my opinion. I know other teams do it different ways.
What criteria do you use to decide who plays them?
So I usually am a proponent of give the best player the worst deck, and I don't know necessarily like just weakest deck, but the deck that's going to require the most hoops to jump through to win a game of Magic, where it's like, man, we really need to not screw things up. You might have to angle for like kind of a weird win condition. I remember we had a deck one time that was like, it was super bad, but it had 2 of this card called Hunting Pack, and it was like a 7 mana storm spell. So you got additional copies every time for every spell that was ever cast, and it was an instant. So you could cast it on your opponent's turn, but you need to like kind of like sit on it and save it for when they cast like a whole bunch of spells, and then maybe you can win a game that way. So we're like, all right, this is like a really janky win condition. It's going to be hard to do, but if anybody's going to do it, it's going to be like the best player on our team, right? And then he found the right situation where our opponent cast 3 spells and he got 4 4/4s and then won the game. It's like, man, I can't believe we got to win out of that deck. It was like a kind of a miracle. But in the hands of like a lesser player who just would have been like, well, I guess I'm just going to cast it here. I need to cast something, and didn't do it right, then they wouldn't have been able to win it. So I'd say like the deck that's going to require like the most like perfect navigation is I would give to the best player.
Yeah, we did that when we played in San Jose.
Mm-hmm.
We gave John the deck that was exactly how you described it. It wasn't the worst. Like it might have been, right in the middle. It might have been the second best deck or something, but it was the most difficult to pilot because it was 3 colors fully. This was Return to Ravnica or whatever. Uh-huh. And it was, and it didn't really have a strong line to it where it was like, this is exactly what this deck is trying to do. It was like the tools were there, but it wasn't as obvious. Like Zane played like, I think red, black, and I played green, white, populate. which were both decks that were like very well known draft archetypes, where like John's deck was a little bit more like pieced together from what we had. And he had strong cards, but like I said, it wasn't a straightforward deck as far as like, this is what the plan is. It was kind of like, you need to look at your hand and decide what your plan is, because it's not going to be the same every time.
Yeah, or it's going to have, maybe the deck doesn't have as great of mana and you have to make hard mulligan decisions or that kind of stuff.
Exactly.
Yeah. And I think that's only true if all three players are like in the same ballpark of play skill. Maybe you have a second, but if you have like, Kai, Finkel, and like one person who doesn't know what trample does, like I wouldn't give the best deck to to that third player,
Right.
But for the most part, if you're forming a team, like it's hopefully three players with, maybe somewhat similar experience levels. And, but maybe you're just like, okay, this is the alpha dog. And, this is kind of like the player that's, not really used to playing that many different archetypes or whatever. If you just have players with strong preference of play, then I think it's reasonable to divide them up that way. Like so and such player is best at playing control decks, really likes control decks, then you probably shouldn't give them the mono red aggro deck. Right. And I think when you're forming your team, it's a good idea to keep those kind of things in mind too. But I think just because you have those roles on the team, you should still, during deck building, consider that all three decks could be your deck when you're deciding. I think that's super important because it's just human tendency to just be like, I want that. I see how that would be good. I want it. And you just don't make rational decisions.
So do you try to talk that out before you're even at the tournament site with your teammates and just say, guys, when we're building, don't assume anything about who's playing what. Just try to build the best possible deck in a vacuum.
Right. And I think that really helps if you do like a practice build first, where you're just like,
at
okay.
least one.
Yeah. Where you can just be like, okay, these are the, where you can work as a team together to try to build the three best combination of decks you can.
This is huge, by the way.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think that it's apparent on the surface how complicated it is to build three decks from one massive pile of cards. It's like, it takes time and it's difficult and there's a lot of decisions that need to be made. And there's two different types of decisions that need to be made. There's like macro and micro decisions where it's like, do we run this over this in this deck is like a micro decision, right? It's like somebody just needs to make the call on what that deck needs. Then there's the macro stuff, which is like, you need to be able to look at a huge pile of cards. By the way, John's very good at this and just say, all right, there's definitely a green-white, there's definitely a black-red, and we can make a deck out of what's left over. Let's start with that, right? Because otherwise you just go, well, what if we pair the black with the green? Well, what if the green and then red? It's like you can just go in circles. And if you don't have an idea ahead of time for how you think that should be handled and you've never done it before, you're going to waste very valuable time. And I'll tell you, the last one that I covered, I covered the last, it was like in Providence. And the one that I covered, I think, was in Providence. And I saw many teams bickering down the stretch and being like, we just have to do this. Like somebody just has to make a decision because like if you don't get your stuff submitted, you just have to start randomly writing down cards and it gets really, really bad for you. So, one thing that I would say is that as much as it's great to work in a team environment, you should dedicate or designate is what I'm trying to say. Designate one person to be, they don't have to be the leader, but just that they have the final say, that they're the ones who make the call when nobody can agree and that everybody agrees that person made the call and the call has been made and now we're moving forward. Because if you don't, and especially if you have two people that think that they're the guy or the girl and they're not, like they just, I know this format. I've played this. I've done that. And then the other person's like, no, you have no idea what you're talking about. And you know how those ego things get popped up in Magic all the time? Oh man, if you have two of those people going at it, the process gets really ugly. Like, think how you and I get along, right? Like we get along well. We have a similar approach to Magic. It's like throw in, Ornithopter guy who's like, trying to prove to you that he can play Ornithopter. Now you have to tell him, no, like we're not going anywhere near that archetype, right? And so you really do, it really benefits you, I think, to get sort of a hierarchy laid out beforehand. It's not a boss thing. Like for us, we just said, look, we'll have John make the final call on this stuff, but we all gave input. Like we all agreed on everything together, but you need to be able to go up the ladder in case the time starts ticking and nothing's moving forward.
Yeah, yeah. So say if you have 50 or you have 60 minutes for deck building. So I kind of feel by maybe like a 30-minute mark, you should have a good idea of what your color breakdowns are.
Some shells going, yeah.
Right. And that part's a lot harder than normal. Because when you're building like a one-person sealed deck, frequently you're like, okay, black's really good. Now do I want to pair it with white or green? Right? And then you lay out black, white, then you lay out black, green, and you try to decide which is better, and you go back and forth. But when you're doing the team deck building, you lay out the black, and then you lay out the white. Now, if you want to switch to green, you have to take the green cards from another player.
Yes, right. And now things get complicated very quickly.
Right. Where then you're like, okay, well then they take back the white, and you're like, well, the white doesn't work with my color because now all my cards cost the same. All my cards cost 5 now. And like, well, what if you give the white to the blue guy, and then the blue guy gives red, and then you lay out that, and you're like, no, this doesn't work because now I don't have any removal, and then you're like. You're like going all over the place. So like actually just deciding what your color pairs are takes probably the majority of your time, but you need to make sure that you leave yourself enough time to, make all the final calls on what cards you're playing, move around the artifacts, move around your evolving wilds, and then register your deck.
Yeah, and we haven't even mentioned sideboards yet.
Yeah. All the cards you're not playing have to go you have to decide whose sideboard they're going into.
Yes,
right?
All the cards get registered.
Yeah, every card gets registered.
And they go to a specific person. So
Yes.
if you decide to throw, like if you use up all your time during deck build and then just sort of randomly hand piles of cards to each teammate for their sideboard, you could leave a lot on the table. And I've seen people do that like in real life. I was watching it and they're just like, well, we're completely out of time. So here, and here, start writing these down. And it's like, wow, right? Like no sideboard, and you're dealing with 160 something cards, and you're only playing 23-ish of them per deck. So that's 69, maybe 68, maybe 70, whatever of the cards get used up. And you're not even using half. I guarantee that you not only have some really sick sideboard cards, but also you could probably transform the deck into a different style or a different look or a different speed, based on what your opponent was playing, even just within that. And if you just throw all that opportunity away because you took too much time, you're really giving up a lot.
One of my friends is not allowed to have a sideboard in team events because he sideboards so badly.
You just take it away?
Yeah, just say like, no, you cannot have the pandemonium in the sideboard of your red deck. No, you cannot have that. It's like...
So this works perfectly because you can just give that friend only the cards that are reasonable to sideboard and take away the rest.
Yeah, only the pure obvious ones where it's like, destroy target white permanent or whatever,
Now, one thing that I know that helps out a lot with Team Sealed and doing this whole deck building thing. You mentioned it in one way, Brian, which is simply building some decks, right? Mm-hmm. Like getting together with your team and figuring out how you're going to lay out the deck. Like that's another thing that I'll come back to my main point in a second, but like, where are you going to put the cards and how? Mm-hmm. Like sure. Everybody views these things differently. So sit down and do it together so that you can all maybe get on one side of the table or put them in the middle so everybody can see them. I saw one team lay all of their cards in one line. Every card in one, like I walk by and I'm like, what are you guys, like in my head, like, what are you doing? Like
a buffet?
Yeah, but they were vertically lined up down the table.
Right.
It just didn't make any sense at all. So those little things that don't seem like a big deal, those are some of the things that you really do want to make sure that you hammer out because, man, like you can save precious time and mental energy by doing that. But what I really wanted to say is, and this is obvious, but knowing the format is huge, right? Like example, you and I, when we were talking about M15, we're talking about the Convoke deck. And we were basically referring to it as the white-green Convoke deck because those seem to be the two colors that really work best for the strategy. They have the best Convoke cards, and they have the stuff that supports it, the cheap one-drops and that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. And so we're like, okay, cool. So you and I understand that. If you and I were teaming for this GP and there was a nice... like we saw a couple of triplicate spirits and a siege worm, we would already know, let's take a look to see if the white-green Convoke deck is here. Like, do we have all the other pieces, right? If we hadn't played enough or just weren't really paying enough attention or didn't get it, that could be the same, like, that could be green blue, which I've had no success with in this format, right? And like, we could be like, oh, let's take a look at the green blue deck. And that could be really, really bad. But to us, it's all the same. If you know the formats and you know the strong color pairs and the synergies going in, you'll already have one leg up, because if it's there, you'll see it. Where normally, like, can you imagine literally taking your green cards and pairing them up with every single other color?
Right.
Right? Like, that's
Right.
the other option, is like trying to
Yeah.
just say, well, green black didn't look very good. Let's try green red. Okay. And then like eventually you're like, hey, green white looks like it might be good. And then you find it, but you don't have time for that.
Right. Yeah, I think you want to have a little bit of practice on, so you can have a like an initial position where you can be like, okay, this is our default. We're going to see how it looks. And then if you find major issues, like, okay, normally we like playing blue and red together, but like both blue and red are so deep that it would be like a huge waste. You know, you'd be like wasting like 15 good blue and red cards. And you're like, we need to divide these colors up. They're just too deep.
Right.
But it's good to have like the initial position where you try that first.
Yes. And that way you can at least get at that overview going, because it is not easy to look at all of those at once and figure it out.
Yeah. Just one logistical point that I like to do is when you sit down, I hand out, two colors to one person, two colors to another person, and one person gets artifacts, lands, and the fifth color. And like those, that's how you chaff them. That's how you take out the cards that you think are unplayable, because you don't want to waste your time, just like going through cards that you're just not going to play. And obviously you can always come back to that pile later, but I think it's better to do that individually rather than wasting all your time as a team going through like, no, we're not going to main deck Solemn Offering. No, we're not going to play this Fog or whatever. Like just like your time is precious. And I think like in that case, delegating the responsibility to all your teammates to do at their own, at the same time is better.
Yeah. I mean, and again, this comes down to like teammate trust, right?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, you can always
like some people,
Yeah. I mean, you can always go through that pile. I mean, and you should go through that pile, for a second pass after you've decided on what colors you're going to play, and maybe make some new decisions or whatever. Yes. But it's like just there needs to be some things that you let people do. And the other thing is, I think once the decks get pretty close to their final forms, and now you can decide who plays what, that's where I think you can kind of like start to let people kind of make some individual calls on their own decks. And obviously, like if you have like one player that's like much stronger and like they maybe have like a better understanding of the format or whatever, you can kind of lean on that player to help. But I think that's kind of the point where it's like, okay, these two cards are like pretty darn close. Like, which do you prefer? You're going to be playing the deck.
Yes, and that's, I think it is really important to make sure that you let people get a little bit of that in, right? Mm-hmm. Like, let's say that you were on a team, you have the most knowledge, so it makes sense for you to make a lot of the decisions. But if somebody says, no, I've had a lot of success with this card, and, it's like, you know what, if you know the card and you know how to do it, go for it. Especially because like sometimes these formats are pretty new, like this one.
Yeah. Something that I always tell my teammates that I found is an issue for me, usually because I'm the best player on my team, whether it's Two-Headed Giant or Team Sealed or whatever, is to tell my teammates, if you think I'm wrong or you think I'm making a mistake, please tell me, because I might not see something that you see. And like, I'm not always right. Like, I guarantee when I play Magic, I'm not always right, whether it's individual plays or deck building decisions or whatever. Like, I make mistakes. And if you see my mistake and you just don't say anything because you're like, oh, well, he's more experienced than me or whatever, he's probably right. Like, then we're going to have a team mistake. Right. But if you speak up and let me know, then maybe, I didn't consider that point of view. Like, that totally makes sense. Let's go with your idea. Right. So you don't want to have everyone on the team just like beholden to what the best player says. Like, that'd be a tragedy.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And this is I don't know that there's really advice we can give in this category, but this is where the strong, experienced, comfortable teams just excel. Because they will agree with each other. They will be on the same page. They will be able to say, I think you might be wrong about this, and this is why. And the other person's like, wow, you're right. Okay, change of course, right? And they just go, right? And where immature, inexperienced teams will start bickering, and they'll fight, and they'll have arguments, and you'll see people like, trying to flesh out the difference between two cards while they're building, right? It's
Yeah.
like, oh man, or you'll see them make fun of each other or put each other down. I view the initial layout of the cards like a brainstorming session. And,
Hmm.
sort of the rule in a brainstorming session is that you don't shoot anything down.
Right.
Everything goes.
Hmm.
And then you sort through all the ideas later, and then stuff can get crossed off the list. But when you're just brainstorming, you're supposed to just say whatever comes to your mind and just let it go. And you spend a couple of minutes like, okay, there's green, blue, there's green, black. And if somebody's just like, no, that's unplayable in this format, right now, all of a sudden you're not even looking at that anymore, and it might be there, right?
Right.
Like 12 packs is weird. It introduces some very strange things to the format. So yeah, I think that personality types meshing, length of friendship, however you want to do it, the people you pick and how you interact with each other really pays off during the build. And if you pick, immature, sketchy people that are angry, you're going to regret it. It
Right.
gets pretty ugly.
Yeah, I mean, also at some point, it's like when you're arguing about like somebody's 23rd card, which of these two things it should be. It's like you don't need a 5-minute argument over that. It's like it's almost it's very immaterial. Like at that point, like that's not like that shouldn't be a huge argument, right? It's like it's just like
Exactly.
the win percentage of this 23rd card versus that 23rd card is like it's like a decimal point, right? It's like who cares?
Yeah, and
Just like let it go.
right. And smart people know how much weight to put on different decisions, right?
Yeah.
And people that aren't that smart or that don't have experience making these type of decisions don't. So they will sit there and go for a 4-minute fight about a 23rd card. And where somebody with a little more perspective might show up and be like, this decision is not that important. Like the cards are, like one of them is 80% as good as the other. We don't know which one, but pick the one that you want. Like, why are we, we don't have the resources to deal with this decision. We have to decide what Jimmy's playing, right? Like, what about his deck, right?
Right.
And so you allocate the resources, accordingly. And all of a sudden, you can get done. Like, if you're a well-oiled team that has a pretty easy pool, you can fire it off pretty quickly. And I guarantee you, if you're at the event, look around during the deck build and you will see people fighting every single time.
Yep. And that's the thing about Magic is such normally an individual game that you have all those conversations internally, and usually you don't beat yourself up about them too badly, right? But you might have, very like honest discourse with yourself where you're like, oh, I totally bungled that, or, you idiot or whatever. But when you're playing with teammates, like you have to be a little more political than that,
Yes.
than you're used to. And I don't know if this is the first time we ever talked about this on Limited Resources, but it's actually kind of fascinating, like the team dynamics you can have. And if you just play, so a lot of times you play like a house draft. We play team draft, where everybody drafts like normal, and then we divide up into teams randomly afterwards, and then you help your teammates build their decks.
Yeah,
and
this has become the standard for the unsanctioned side draft.
Right. And the reason that's so good is because you get other people's perspective on the format and you learn faster. Right? Where it's like, well, is this card any good? I've never played it before, but I took it 5th or whatever. And someone's like, no, I tried that. It's not good because of this reason. You're like, oh, okay. But you just learn the format a lot faster, but you also just learn how to interact with teammates better. And hopefully when you actually get to build a team building exercise, you won't get bogged down in like petty arguments.
Yes, I think that if the more of because I've done like all of our coverage drafts are in that format. We just call it random teams after.
Yep.
And the one of the reasons for that too is that if you have random teams after, you don't have the team element during the draft, which is sometimes good, but it's also sometimes not desirable. And also the rares, right? Like that way you can just ship the rares around and not worry about it. Anyway, but that's a separate thing.
Do you want to talk about actual team booster draft now?
Yeah, we should. Now, I do want to mention one thing, though. The format is different now at the GPs. There used to have like a day 2 with multiple drafts on it. And now when you come back for day 2, you do another sealed. And that takes you up to the cut. And then you get to draft twice. So the draft's actually quite minimalized. almost all the teams that show up for a team limited GP are not going to get to draft. So it sucks. I think that the draft is really one of the big pulls to the format, but logistically, and as somebody who works behind the scenes at the tournaments, they are an absolute nightmare. You can't do them. Like, you just can't get through the amount of time that you need to get through in order to do it the way that they want to do it. So they've cut it down to, only those last few rounds are actually draft, but it's still important. And more importantly, it's something that you can do outside, right? It's the money draft format.
Yeah. It's a super fun way to play Magic. And if you go to a Grand Prix and you maybe lose out on day one, it's just fun to find other teams and play team booster draft against them.
Especially since you're already there with your team. It's not like you have to scrounge anybody up.
Yeah, it's great. And it's called money draft because people like to gamble on these.
Yes, and that's the normal way.
Yeah.
It's not supported by Wizards. So if you're at a tournament, you shouldn't show that you're gambling actual money. Right. But people often do. They just agree to the terms without actually bringing money onto the table. They'll say $20 each. Okay, cool. So everybody pitches in $20 and the winning team gets all of it. So basically you're just playing for $20. I've also done it in Vegas where you can actually, as long as the people are paired up the same, you can decide how much you want to bet. Because I was playing with a bunch of poker players, but there were some non-poker players there too, and they were a little bit gun shy about gambling. So it was well, how much do you want to play for? And most people were well, I'll play for 100, but then they were I don't have that much money. I want to play for $10 or $20. And it was well, there was one person on each team that wanted to do that. So you can just do that. And they just, and so it works out. Again, though, be careful. You got to respect Wizards of the Coast and their wishes on this. You don't want to, break any rules. You can get in trouble for it. I mean, you're not supposed to do it. So, you do need to respect it. But if you're in the comfort of your own home or you do it in a really discreet manner, it is, and of course, you don't have to put money on this, right? You can also just play.
Yeah, you can play for the cards.
Yeah,
or
that's
you can
a very common thing.
Play for a draft set or whatever, or you just play for pride. Who knows?
Yes, but the cool part is that it introduces a completely different dynamic to the draft format. Why don't you talk about that, Brian?
Yeah, so it's rather than doing the random teams after or an individual draft, it's alternating, team A, team B, team A, team B around the table. So that the person passing to you and the person you're passing to, they're the enemies. So it's a lot more hostile than your average booster draft. So I kind of think of normal booster draft as just find what's open and just take those. Whereas in team draft, it's as much about punishing the people around you as it is about building a good deck for yourself.
Right.
I played a lot of team draft. We have a thing we call the Seattle Draft League, where it's just all team draft. And it's you have the same team for the entire season. So yeah, you get a lot of experience of it. But yeah, it plays out super differently from booster draft. Hate drafting, which people love to talk about in regular booster draft, and I don't really like that much. But in team draft, hate drafting is everything. You almost never just pass a huge bomb for a card that's just merely playable. You just never do that.
Now, the reason is because of the seating arrangement.
Right, because you don't know for sure that the person you're passing to is playing that color, but it's almost never worth risking it. In a situation where the bomb you're passing is so much better than the card you would take for your own deck. Because it's they get it, and you have to play against, they play against you, your team all 3 rounds, right? That card is going to show up against your team 3 times. Whereas if you play in a normal booster draft, you might never play against that person.
Right.
You might get through all 3 rounds of the draft and just never play that person. It's not that big of a deal. Or you might play them and they might not draw it. But in a team draft, it's man, just the smallest things make a big difference. And just them having that good card in their deck, that's a huge deal. In team draft, I am always trying to think about what the people around me are playing. Whereas in normal booster draft, I'm frequently just whatever, I don't really care. But it's okay, if they passed me this, on this certain pick in pack 1, it's they can't possibly be playing that color. So then I get to pack 2, I'm trying to ship that color through them to my teammate. And there's the big thing that people do in team draft. It's called pass cutting.
Yeah, and the old hook and cut.
Yeah, and people love pass cut, but it's basically you send like a really clear signal. You try to get them drafting that color, and then you move into that color and just shut them down. And you maybe just give them like a little flicker of hope every now and then, where it's like, all right, 10th pick, I'll give you this 2/1 or whatever. Some card they're like, oh, okay, I can keep drafting this color, and then pack 3 comes around, you just shut them down again, and then their deck ends up like a train wreck.
It's so brutal.
Yeah, a good pass cutter. Your goal is to go because your own deck is going to usually not be that good either. But your goal is to go 1-2 or 2-1 and have them go 0-3.
Yes.
And if you did that, it was worthwhile. It was
Which is crazy. It's just, basically what it does is it takes your normal seat is in this sort of weird world where it's like not really zero sum. Like it technically is. Like the stuff you don't take does get to the other players in some level, but so much of it just ends up in the wrong spot or gets taken by the wrong person or you never play them or whatever. But when you're on 3-on-3 teams, it is strictly zero sum. Like every card you ship to the person on your left is a card that they can take. And every win that you get is a loss that your opponent gets. And every loss your opponent gets is a win that you get, like directly, right? Like let's say you did this in a normal like 8-man draft, right? You might never play that person. They lose in the first round. You don't really gain from that. Right. Like maybe you play against them, but otherwise, your 1 out of 7 shot didn't come in and you hooked and cut somebody really hard and really train wrecked them. But of course, like you mentioned, it hurt you too. If they lose in the first round, that doesn't really benefit you in a tangible way.
No.
Where if the person you hook and cut in a team draft does, it benefits your team in the most tangible way, like the best way possible.
Yeah, I guess I should mention that when you do a team draft, usually you play all 3 rounds. So you play against all 3 people on their team. And then you add up, and that's a total of 9 matches, and first team to 5 wins, basically. It's best out of 9, yeah.
Right.
So you pretty much don't pass bombs unless you feel very confident in your read that they're not that color.
And even then, like the big payoff is that they will then not pass the bomb and not play it. Like it's, it's still one of those things where like you're still not benefiting a ton. It's crazy.
Okay. So here's a different situation. So let's say you're opening like pick 1, pack 1, and you open a pack with 3 cards in it. And it's pretty clear what the best 3 cards are. Okay. It's 2 really good red cards and 1 really good blue card. So in a normal draft, I would say take the blue card because you take the blue card, and then you ship that red mess. And if the 2 people on your left both end up in red, like that's no big deal, right? You don't care.
No.
In fact, that's actually your ideal situation. But in a team draft, if you take the blue card and pass the 2 red cards, the person on your left will take a red card and go into red. And then they'll pass the last card to the person on their left, which is your teammate, and they'll go into red. But they're going to be in red in a bad situation with somebody else in red on their right. And you just you basically set up the pass cut against your own teammate.
Right.
Right. So what you're better off doing is taking one of the red cards yourself and then hoping the person on your left also goes red. And then that's the ideal situation.
Right.
But it's like
now you're doing it to them.
Exactly. So you always had to be thinking about what's like the ripple effect and what's going to get through to my teammate. So I guess the other situation where I was talking about you never pass a bomb. That's not always true. So let's say there's a card that's like a bomb. It's like maybe like it's like a B plus on our scale, right? But then there's another card in that color that's a B, and this let's say this is pack 3, and you don't have a great sense of what the person on your left is doing. If you pass both of those cards, rather than hate drafting it, even if they take the B plus, your teammate might get the B. Right. So in a situation like that, you're almost better not hate drafting and just taking the C plus for your own deck, because that guarantees that the B will make it to your teammate rather than you hate drafting the B plus and then the enemy team getting the B.
Right.
Right. Because it's all about the equation. What do we get and what do we deny them? And you have to add it up, basically.
Right.
But the other thing is you might be wrong. So you can't be too confident in what people are doing on your right or left. You want to be thinking about it, but you're never going to know for sure. So here's a situation where somebody tried to pass cut me. So we were playing M12 or something like that, M13, I forget. But there was a pack with I think like Grave Titan, Doomblade, and Chandra's Outrage. So it was like two really good black cards and a really good red card. So obviously, like the player who opens that pack takes the Grave Titan.
The Gravy Train.
Yeah, I mean that's a pretty obvious pick there. But then what that player thought is, okay, the two cards I'm passing, Doomblade and Chandra's Outrage, those are both good, but Doomblade's better. I mean, I think that's not really
that's the consensus, I suppose.
right. Yeah. However, so this person was passing to me, right? But my first pick was red. So when I get a pick of Doomblade versus Chandra's Outrage and I'm playing red, I'm just going to take the Chandra's Outrage.
Yeah, it's close enough that being on color is definitely worth it.
Right. So then the rest of the draft, Corbett, the person on my right,
Who's Corbet?
yeah, was just hooking me up with red cards, being like, and he was thinking that they were all going to get through to his teammate.
Oh my goodness.
And I just put them all right in my deck, and my deck ended up insane. And it's just like, well, he kind of outthought himself a little bit there, right? He put too much confidence into the mind game and not enough just playing sound good Magic. So it's definitely good to like think about these things, but you don't want to go overboard.
Yeah, that's it. That's a good way to put that.
Okay. The other important dynamic about how team draft is different from regular individual draft is you need to pay a lot more attention to what's going on the table. So frequently when I play like a booster draft, individual draft, you kind of get to this point in the draft where you're really only looking at your own colors. And it's like, okay, maybe you kind of want to know just to have an idea of what other decks might have at the table and what tricks to play around or whatever, but it's not quite as important.
Yeah,
but
I'll usually note particular, like, oh, I passed a Wrath effect.
Right.
Some 6 sideboard card or some really powerful, like you pass a bomb, it's like, well, it exists, but that's not really that notable.
Right. But in team draft, there's so much more information that you can get from this, and then you have a lot more to gain from the information that you have. So if you say, all right, in pack 3, pick 4, did you see this card? And they say no, then you go, okay, we know they took it, so they're playing blue.
And they isn't the team, it's this person.
Yeah.
Like she has that card, right?
Yeah.
Like you know exactly who took it.
Exactly. So you can start to figure out exactly what their team is doing. And for certain cards, that's very, very important. Like certain tricks, if you know that they have Aether Spouts, for example, from M15.
Yes.
Now you're not going to be like, okay, it's turn 5 and they have 6 cards in hand. I'm not going to attack with my entire team.
Right.
Right? So it's super important to know that. You can also, if you're very good, know what cards they don't have, because you can be like, well, there's no way they would have first picked this. They don't have this type of card in their deck. You can, if you're really good, you can get there. But it's also just important to be like, okay, if your team is like really on the ball and you're all doing this together, you can actually start to be like, what removal could they have here? What tricks could they have here? What counters do they have? Always pay attention to mass removal. Never let your teammates walk into a Wrath of God or a Pyroclasm or whatever. Like, never let your teammates walk into mass removal. You need to always tell them, which things you passed. Which high priority targets for removal they have. Like, it's like, okay, if they have Nightfire Giant, don't use your Flesh to Dust on Thundering Giant. Or whatever, it's like
right.
you need to basically let them know what their long-term game plan is going to be by letting them know like what cards are in their deck. That's super important. Also, like just while you're playing the games, because you play the next round and the next round against the same team, you need to keep in mind what everything you saw in the course of the match, and especially like tricks and just like some key cards. So part of it's identifying which cards are important to remember, but then before your teammate starts playing against that person, you need to tell them they have this counter spell, they have this removal spell, they have this bomb, they have this board sweeper, or whatever. Like, this is what their deck is trying to do. It looks like their deck is slow. It looks like their deck is fast. You think that maybe you didn't see triplicate spirits from them, but you can tell like it really seems like they're doing that type of deck, based on the cards you saw them play. Giving your teammate this information before they even play game 1 is huge.
It's huge.
It really is. So you need to be like super on the ball about remembering this stuff. And I think it's great because if you practice it enough in team draft, when you actually play individual draft, it comes so much more natural.
Yeah. And the cool part is that when you're doing it in team draft, there's this sort of passive pressure on you to do it. Mm-hmm. Like you don't on your own, you never really considered it, or you're just too lazy or whatever.
Right.
But now it's like, dude, I need to know what you gave him. Like, there's so much information. Like, you can basically construct all of the decks outside of the first picks roughly if you had, like, you know, perfect memory, right? Now, the fact is, there's, like, you don't need to know, dude, does he have a Runeclaw Bear? It's like, well, you'll see it or you won't, right? But there's
Right.
key spells and there's key types of spells that you do need to know whether they have it or not.
Yeah.
And that's on you. And each person has that information.
Yeah. So it's like, did you pass them a crowd's favor? It's like, do I want to attack my Kurd chieftain into their 3/3 when they're tapped out of mana?
Yeah.
Right. And it's like, I don't want to walk into this into this card, you know, and have you say no, you didn't pass it to them when you did.
That's the key. Like, it's okay to admit that you can't remember.
Yes.
It's obviously not great, right? Like,
Right.
it means that you're not doing your job all the way, but it's much better than saying no and then them showing it to you, especially when it's something like Crowd's Favor where there's no way they first picked it, you know,
Right.
and like, you did pass it to them.
Yeah.
Oops.
Oh, it reminds me of one cube draft we did, team draft, where my teammate asks like, did you see Force Spike from this player? And he says no. So he's like, okay, Sphinx's Revelation for everything. And then he plays Mana Tithe. And it's like, you idiot. Like, and he's like, yeah, I saw that one. Like,
oh no.
Thanks. Thank you.
That is fantastic. Oh my God.
Just the biggest daggers.
That's
but,
the worst. Yes. That is also super funny.
But yeah, playing on a team will give you a little bit more functional knowledge of what's going on. The other thing you can do differently in team drafting is, even if you don't necessarily, I mean, you can never, unless you're like, you know, some kind of prodigy, you can never piece together exactly what everybody on their team is doing. Like, you just can't do it.
Yeah, and
Right.
it's frankly just not worth spending the mental effort to get every piece of everything.
Yeah, I mean, it's just not humanly possible, right? But you can, like, let's say you sit down and even you don't remember really what you passed that well, but you look at your own decks, right? And you have a green-blue deck, you have a black-white deck, and you have a black-blue deck on your team. You're like, well, chances are you don't have any red decks on your team. They probably have 2 red decks.
Right.
And if the format you're playing in means that red is aggressive every time, like M15 seems like that, then you need to build your decks knowing that they have at least 2 aggro decks on their team.
Yeah, which is really cool because it means you have that knowledge before even sitting down to actually build your decks. That's a huge difference between what you normally can expect.
Right. In a situation like that, you'd be like, well, I was kind of on the fence about playing the Stormtide Leviathan, but if they're playing like all aggro decks, I'm just not going to do it.
Yeah.
And so you build your deck accordingly. Or you might be like, okay, you know, normally I feel pretty good about, you know, main decking a Solemn Offering, for example. I don't know if that's true or not. But if you just talk to your teammates and you're like, well, we didn't pass them really any good targets, then you shouldn't do it. So it's like even like the deck construction portion of the event is very impacted by it being team.
Yeah, team is really the purest. It is super sweet.
Yeah, and I highly recommend it if you're, you know, the type of player that's only played, you know, F&M drafts at the store or whatever. If you get a chance to, and you can play like some team drafts here and there, I think it can really like open your eyes to like different things to think about, and I think it has application to your individual drafting as well down the road.
Yeah, and I don't know if we made this abundantly clear or not, but they're basically always done with 6. They're teams of 3.
Right. I mean, you can do 4-on-4,
Yeah.
you can do 5-on-5.
Yes.
You can even do 4-on-3. It actually works out because both teams still end up playing the same number of matches.
Oh, interesting.
Right? Because it's like, well, you can never play against somebody who's not on, you know, who's your teammate. So it actually,
right.
You know, both teams are playing the same number of matches. Even if you have like a weird number of players, it's still okay. With 9 players, I've done like 3v3v3. And that's pretty cool too. Like, so it's like, you know, don't get so we love team drafting. We team draft basically every time.
Yeah. That's a coverage team. We're always team draft. Well, so we go back and forth. Like,
sure.
we always do the team format, but we rarely do. We almost always pick the teams after.
Sure. And the reason you do that is because it simulates a pure draft environment more, right? So you don't hate draft if you don't know who your teammates are.
And that's just a more realistic look at what a format is, because when we do the coverage drafts, I mean, of course, we enjoy doing them and we're doing them for fun or whatever, but we also do them so that we can learn the card names and have a better grasp of the format for when we're in the booth.
Yeah.
And if we do team drafts, it doesn't show us an accurate representation of what like the pros look like when they sit down at the table.
Mhm.
So we always do that.
So one thing that you might think to do if you're playing a team booster draft is just like assign colors and be like, okay, this person's going to draft white green, this person's going to draft blue red, this person's going to draft, I don't know, mono green or whatever. Um, that's a bad idea because, in my opinion, it's a bad idea because if you just open a bomb in a different color, that either means you can't take it or uh, you take it and now your teammates are passing that thing thinking it's going to get to you and you just can't take it either. Um, so I think it's better if all three teammates are actually flexible during the draft rather than.
Trying to have some game plan or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, I mean, it might work, but when it doesn't work, like it's going to be catastrophic.
Yeah, that's just not drafting anyway, right? Like,
Yeah, I mean, I definitely like that's an idea that people would have though for sure.
yes.
Yeah, I don't really recommend that. I mean, it's useful to know your teammates' preferences. Like if you just say, I know that my teammate takes this card higher than most people, and we'll take it as a signal. And then you figure it's going to get to them third pick or it's going to get to them fourth pick or whatever. And you're like, okay, in that case, you can have a pretty good sense that your teammate will take it and move into the colors. But I just think like you don't want to be like set in stone. Like you want to be kind of adaptable.
Right. As always with draft.
Yeah, as always. Forcing anything is not like the worst thing, but usually it's definitely not the best thing. That's how I describe it. You got anything else on Team Marshall?
No, I wanted to just reiterate, though, that so the conversation that we've had is about team limited, right?
Mm-hmm.
And for the most part, that applies to team sealed when it comes to Grand Prix. But I really think that this second part about the draft, even if your team doesn't make it to the draft portion of the GP, and even if you never play a team GP, it still has a ton of value for you and your friends, for you even at a local shop. Like I said, this is how like most Magic players that I know draft is they get six people, and they either make teams ahead of time or teams randomly are assigned after, depending on what kind of draft experience they're going for, and they play it out like that. This is the industry standard.
Yeah.
You know, the eight person drafts that you play online are the sanctioned format, and they're really important to know. But when I get together and draft in real life with people, it's almost always six people, and it's almost always either teams before or teams after. So there's so much to be learned, and I really do think that that's like my favorite way to play.
Yeah, and I think the main reason is because having teammates lets you discuss the format in a way that you don't get to with individuals, and it's just a better learning environment.
It is. That's why I love it. I mean, when I do it, I get to hear what Randy Buehler thinks about the drafts he's done so far. Mm-hmm. It's not just me guessing. I have my input, he has his, and you know, we'll get Nate Price's input too, and then we'll all kind of put it together. And like you said, the train just moves a lot further with three engines in front. So yeah, I can't recommend it highly enough. And then Team Sealed it doesn't come up often, but when it does, man, those decks, that's the thing that I kind of want to underline our whole discussion is that the decks are so good. Like I can't wait to do commentary on them because the decks are insane. Like you'll have like multiples of premium removal spells. If there's a synergy you want, it's there. Like if you want to play the red-white auras deck, you're going to have Heliod's Pilgrim times 5, and you're going to have a list of auras to choose from. Right? It's there.
Yep.
You're going to have it. Okay, so why don't we wrap this thing up? If you guys would like to send us an email for feedback, it's lr@lrcast.com. If you'd like to follow us on Twitter, it's a great place to ask questions or just say hi. I'm Marshall_LR, and Brian is Brian_LR. If you'd like to join the clan on Magic Online, it's a little tough. I was getting message today for clan invites, I'm assuming, and I couldn't see or respond to the messages. It just let me know that I got one, but they weren't there. And so it was a little awkward because I'm like, I can't even say sorry. Like I'm just like ignoring them, and I wasn't trying to. So you'll have to try again at a different time. But when it does work, and I have been able to do invites recently, so it's not an issue overall. It was just a today thing for some reason. All you got to do is send me a message, Marshall_LR, and I'll get you an invite. The only rules are, of course, you got to love Magic and you can't be a jerk. If you meet that requirement, then I will get you in to the Limited Resources clan. We're almost at 4,000 people, Brian.
Oh my God.
Yeah,
what happens then?
Then we go to 5,000.
Oh.
If you would like to find out anything about limited resources, including links to my articles, to Brian's stream, to the new podcast, The One for One. For all of these things, you can go to lrcast.com. Guys, thanks for hanging out, and I'll see you on the stream at the Pro Tour.
Psst. Hey, Billy.
Hey, what's up?
Here, take this.
What is it?
It's an ornithopter. You put it in your deck.
I don't know.
Come on, Billy. Everyone's playing it.
They are?
Yeah, you can use it to convoke or block flying creatures. It doesn't even cost anything.
That does sound good.
And I even heard Brian Wong played it, and he went 2-2.
Awesome!
All right, later, Billy. I'm late for PE, and if I'm late one more time, Mrs. Kradzewski is going to have my hide. If you don't talk to your kids about Ornithopter, who will?